Uh, Mark and I are picking this up after a week's absence, and I don't remember too much of what I said last week, but so I made a few notes today, so I'm going to use some. And the one thing I wanted to talk about is what Mrs. Johnson expected from her teachers and what our responsibilities were as teachers. She used to tell us in teachers' training that there were two kinds of teachers. One that would be very enthusiastic, very active, full of ideas, and a bit aggressive and forward. And that could be very good if it didn't usurp the child's interest and continued always in just a leadership form. The other kind was the teacher who, as she used to put it, created an atmosphere and set a table, so to speak, of all the good things, and then retreated and let the children take the lead. And I remember her saying, really, that is my preference to the teaching approach. And I thought it so often because I tended to be more like the first description. So it was good that she had said that to me, because then I would remember to draw back and not be coercive in my enthusiasm. But I think children in later years tend to remember the aggressive teacher. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know, because I'm sure there's some very wonderful teachers. The children in their maturing don't remember too much, and yet the atmosphere must have been beautiful for them, and the teacher very wisely set the table, so to speak. So in my own studio, I tried to remember that and use it. And what I found, that it really worked beautifully in that then not any child was put upon to achieve more than they were capable of achieving, because if you got the right atmosphere, they came in and they did take, produce, and create at their own level. And the responsibility of that teacher then would be to be sure the atmosphere was right. And the atmosphere, what I tried to realize, should be joyous. It should be such that the curiosity of the child was kept very much alive, because the human being is born enthusiastic and wanting to learn. And that should be true all of our lives, if that isn't killed. And in my notes I just said here, children are eager to learn, and they are. And in my observation now, when children start school, they're so joyous, and within 2 or 3 years, they frankly say, I hate school. Certainly something wrong with the system, isn't there? And then in Mrs. Johnson's saying, too, what responsibilities we had as teachers, it really put, if you were sincere and you really felt that you wanted to live this life and carry this responsibility, it meant each word and action is important. Imagine. And I just jotted down here, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable. And then I veered and said, in the sight of our children. Why not? That really puts responsibility to you, doesn't it? And then all of these things that I've spoken of is really the only acceptable way for parents. My, what responsibility that is. Every child has a potential, and so few of us allow it as adults, allow it to blossom. And there was one incident that brought that home so closely to me. In my own studio, we had what we called an open house on Saturdays. We called it the brown paper bag day. Some of my teaching friends in their studios, they said, how can you afford not to teach Saturdays and you just open the house? And I said, I can't afford not to. And it was so interesting to me because I had the high school boys and I had preschool children. They didn't have to come. This wasn't a required thing. None of them stayed away. And it was a day for creative work. They could choose to do anything they wanted. The whole house, the yard, everything was open to them. And it was beautiful to see the little ones being exposed to theory and harmony, another one working with them, somebody else working on a dance routine, others discussing facts of harmony, others at the piano doing duets. Some brought instruments. And at one period, we were studying the Russian composers, and I had recording of Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. We had a beautiful big fig tree just out the window from the piano, and they wanted to act it. And it was amusing because you expect in kindergarten, in first life years, a lot of repetition. At that age, children will want to do or hear Cinderella over and over and over again until the teacher just wants to die. Well, this was happening even with these quite large children. Oh, Mama Dot, let's do Peter and the Wolf again today before we start anything else. And so we'd put the recording on, and they would take turns. And even the boys would get such a kick out of the big boys. They'd say, I want to be the bird this time. And they took turns being all of this. Well, there was one little girl in the group. She was kind of oversized and very quiet, and I never seemed to get anything creative or very joyous about Sydney, from Sydney. One Saturday, she was very quiet. One Saturday when they all got in, she said, Mama Dot, before we start our activities today and choose what we want to do, I would like to play Peter and the Wolf on the piano for you. I said, well, Sydney, that would be lovely. I couldn't imagine. That child sat at that piano. I didn't record it. I had nothing to record it about. She played the entire score. The piano was a bird. The piano was the wolf. The piano was Grandpa. It was absolutely astounding. Not anyone said a word. And when she finished, everybody claps it. Sydney, that was wonderful. Well, that child blossomed right then and there. I couldn't dream that Sydney was going to doing this. So the next Saturday, stupidly of me, when we got they all were there, and I said, Sydney, before we start today, why don't you do Peter and the Wolf again? She said, Mama Dot, I can't do that again. That taught me something. That's the adult, again, expectation of the child. I wanted to carry it beyond with the child. She was through with it. That's one I wanted to tell. And then I wanted to tell you a little bit, too, about adolescence, particularly in boys. But I guess we'll talk about that in the area of what discipline versus authority. And I think that's such a misunderstood thing within parents and schools, definitely. Of course, the organic philosophy is based on the growth of self-discipline. And there was one instance back in my teaching days again, and I so often had 2 or 3 of maybe a family of 5. And this particular morning, the father was bringing 3, I guess, in that family I was teaching, dropping them off, and he had the baby with him, little boy. And I don't know, the little Bobby must have been 5 or 6. Got out of the car, and he went running across the yard, through all the flower beds. And the father yelled at him, and he said, "Damn it, Bobby, stop!" I was kind of shocked. And the child stopped and turned around and ran back to his father with absolutely no fear. And the father said, "I'm sorry I had to call out to you in that manner, but I wanted to get your attention quickly." And the little fellow said, "Yes, Daddy?" And the father said, "The reason I didn't want you to run, you were running and destroying Mama Dot's beautiful flowers." And the little fellow said, "Gee, I won't do that again." Now that father had the complete confidence of that child for an explanation. There was no punishment in it. But the child expected an answer. "Why, Daddy?" And I thought the answer was beautiful. In my own, Mother and Daddy were such dedicated students of Marietta Johnson's philosophy. And in my adolescence, and I had a horse, and I loved that horse. I rode that horse, and then I'd come home and write a love story to that horse. And I thought I was taking good care of the horse, and I was old enough to take the responsibility of 2 things: to see the pal had water, fresh water every day, in quite a large tub, and also to curry the horse before I rode. And that night at supper, and we had that wonderful growing up of the 6 children and Mom and Dad, 3 meals a day, sitting together. And Dad said at the supper hour, "Dottie, have you watered Pal?" "Yes, Daddy." "Fresh water?" And I surely didn't mean to lie, because I guess I thought I had. And I said yes. And he said, "Well, I checked, and there was a little scum on the water. Fresh water doesn't have scum. Now we'll all be real happy to wait supper on you while you go water Pal." So I was dismissed, and I went out and I watered Pal. Well, it takes a little time to fill a tub of water. And when I came back, there was nothing said except supper. They were waiting supper on me. Well, I think that was a real good lesson in responsibility, which I feel at that time I should have been and was capable of carrying. And what a good way Dad handled it. He didn't deny me riding the next day. There was no punishment. It was just the Pal needed water. In my experience too in teachers training on discipline and authority, one afternoon at the lecture time from 3 to 5 with Marietta Johnson, one of the students, teachers training, came rushing in crying. And she said, "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, I've done a terrible thing. I've done a terrible thing." And Mrs. Johnson said, "Well, now just calm yourself." She said, "What happened that's so terrible?" She said, "I spanked a child." This was a kindergarten child. And Mrs. Johnson said, "Well, tell us why you spanked the child." So the student related the incident, and she said, "Oh, but you don't know what child it was." And Mrs. Johnson said, "Well, what child?" Well, it happened to be an only child from one of the very influential families in Fairhope. We all knew it. Mrs. Johnson said, would you like to tell us what happened that you should spank the child?" So the student related, and she said she kept telling the child, "No, no, no, you can't do that." And the child kept doing it, and she repeated it. "You know, no, stop that." And finally she said, "I just lost my temper, and I just picked him up and spanked him." And Mrs. Johnson said, "Good, except that you created a situation